Welcome to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now. I am Deputy Editor Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with our senior analyst Haviv Rettig Gur. Hi, Haviv. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Amanda. It's good to be here.
Where are we finding you today?
Dallas, Texas.
Dallas, Texas. And so actually, in the first part of our conversation, I want to probe a little bit what you're hearing this week ahead of the elections from the U.S. Jews that you're speaking with. And then we're going to talk about and bring to our listenership how Israelis see the two candidates. I'd like to say first and foremost, a disclaimer. I am not voting in this election. I have not voted in a U.S. election since I made Aliyah in 1999. And I believe, Haviv, you are also not voting in this election?
Yeah. I am an American citizen. I have a profound admiration for America in so many ways. I teach America to Israeli 19-year-olds. But I was born in Jerusalem. I am Israeli, and my, heart is in the East, so to speak. And I have not ever voted in an American election, and I don't intend to. My citizenship is a function of my parents. I actually, by American law, can't pass it on because I haven't lived in America as an adult. I have not voted. I don't vote. I don't feel I have the right to make the decisions for Americans.
And I'm right there with you, Haviv, which is why I stopped voting in U.S. elections once I uprooted myself and firmly rooted myself in Israel. But one of the most surprising things I heard from Israelis after I made Aliyah about U.S. elections is people over and over were asking me, why can't President Bill Clinton just run again?
Israelis want President Bill Clinton out to run the Democrat?
This was, of course, 25 years ago when I came here, but it's a very interesting fact, I think, for Israelis to wrap their minds around, because as you and I know, and most of our listeners, presidents can only hold office for 2 terms, whereas, of course, Israeli prime ministers are immortal.
Right. Well, there's, parliamentary systems, because parliament can topple a government at any moment, there's a feeling that it doesn't need to be term limits. And in fact, America only imposed term limits after Roosevelt won a 4th term. And then the Americans said, well, that's actually, not helpful and not healthy for democracy. And they passed term limits. So there is talk among Israelis of term limits because of the experience of Bibi having a Roosevelt length term. But it would be hard for parliamentary systems. Presidential systems all have term limits. France does as well. But for parliamentary systems, it's complicated. So anyway, I think Israelis just really kind of like Bill Clinton is the story. And I think he would do well for Democrats in the Israeli electorate. Not that Israelis would vote in the American election, but nevertheless, he would do well in Israel if he tried to run again.
That is so true. And we'll talk about who Israelis favor in a bit. But first of all, since you've been in the States for about a week now, I'd like to hear what you are hearing from the U.S. Jews you're speaking with about their concerns about the two candidates.
I am hearing a deeply divided community, and more divided than I expected. Jews are very, very liberal in America, historically. I think people should fact check this, but if I remember correctly, when Obama won his first term, the black vote was 87% for Obama, and the Jewish vote was 84%. It was second highest community, and that reflects a long-term trend. But as the Democratic Party has had to grapple with the progressive, not just foreign politics questions on Israel, but the entire sort of hierarchy of race and identity and this ideology of power and who is powerful and privilege, Jews have been left out in the cold by a lot of that. And so there's a huge, I don't know if it's 4% or 40%. We're going to know a lot more in the election. But when you talk to people who plan to vote for Kamala Harris, you hear the same concerns as Jews who were Democrats 10 years ago and aren't such Democrats today. And so the concerns are broader than the people who have actually abandoned the Democratic camp. I should say that, people who come to my talks are the sort of very self-identified, tight-knit, sort of pro-Israel section of the Jewish community, that half or that whatever it is, 60, 70%, depends on the poll, of the Jewish community. And so it leans, there's availability bias. It leans toward support for centrist Democrats all the way over to right-wing Republicans. So that's the group I'm meeting. They think that the progressive camp has gone full on anti-Semitic, and that there is, not all progressives, obviously. I mean, every Jew aware of American politics and involved in American politics knows that there are the Richie Torreses and the Wesley Bells and these progressive minority candidates who are also very connected to their Jewish communities locally. But there are also the Cori Bushes, who, other than missing most of the votes, she's a member of the Squad. She's been ousted in a Democratic primary in Missouri. And other than being very connected, she also was not a very good representative. In other words, she missed most votes in Congress during her term. But she refused to meet the local Jewish paper. Just literally refused. And she refused to meet with the leaders of the Jewish community in her town. And she just really turned her back in Hebrew, we say, b'afganatiyut, in a demonstration, like as a protest, on the Jews and on Democrat left-wing Jews who voted in the primary she then lost, right? And so there is a sense that progressive wing has turned on Israel, but has also turned on Jews because of a larger question than Gaza, and that is the question of hierarchies of privilege and identity and things like that. So I'm meeting Jews who think that there is a war on their story, a war on their interests. And I don't know if that's because I'm meeting one half of the Jews, or if that is even representative of Jews farther to the left who wouldn't just ordinarily come to my talks, even though, of course, they are invited to also ask hard questions. Just a little shout out.
So, of course, Jews are, I think, just 2% of the American population, if I'm not mistaken, right? And we, at the Times of Israel, and we Jews, we Israelis, think that obviously we're the center of every platform. Every single speech has to have something about us. And, often they kind of do in a strange way. But recently I was looking at the Twitter for both Donald Trump and for Kamala Harris, just to see if they're actually blasting out anything at this point, just a week ahead of the elections. And there was nothing, which was kind of interesting to me. And it makes me wonder in a way whether some of these people are kind of taking the broader perspective and looking at the electorate as a gamble in a way. And this Cori Bush, for example, just decided that the Jews weren't worth it to her to pay attention to.
I think that in the case of people like Cori Bush, people like Jamal Bowman, sort of self-identified members of the Squad, it's ideological. Their identity as politicians is wrapped up in the rejection of frankly, the rejection of the Jewish community, of anything organized Jewish community. Jews who are willing to themselves reject the majority views of the Jews and turn to their politics are welcome and even tokenized. But there was more there. She knew this would hurt her, and there's such a spectrum. There's so much ability and range to criticize the Gaza war, and still have a relationship with the Jewish community. And people choosing to go all the way to that edge is a function of these ideologies of privilege and power, and you see that, and they managed to mobilize in Westchester liberal Jews, deeply liberal progressive Jews, to vote for a very progressive candidate, Latimer, against Bowman. And so, Jamal Bowman lost the progressive Jews. He didn't lose the Republican Jews, right? And so I think there's more than that. There's ideology. Also, it's important when you look at things like the Twitter feeds of the campaigns, at a national level, their messaging is national. And at a local level, so there's a lot of local advertising by the campaigns in the swing states. The Jews of Detroit, the Muslim community in Detroit, the Pennsylvania is being flooded. I mean, there's something like $150 million in advertising bought for the last 2 weeks. It's in that range. The numbers were all published. targeting Jews in Pittsburgh, Jews in Philadelphia, because it's the most critical swing state. In Arizona, in North Carolina, you're seeing that kind of targeting, and there you do see specific messaging from the national campaigns to the Jews. So they are a swing group. There are some indications that their support for Democrats dropped between 10 to 15 points. These are, single polls that have come across our desks. And I haven't, seen 15 polls like this. So I don't entirely know. It's hard to poll Jews. You just have to poll just the public and ask them if they're Jews and then single those numbers out. But it looks like there is some sort of a moderate swing of Jews away from the Democrats. We don't know if it's to the Republicans, but we certainly know that it's away from self-identified Democrats. And Jews live in swing states. Jews live in Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Pennsylvania. So,
Let's talk about how Israelis viewed the two candidates. But first, I'd like to read out just small quotes from both of them about how they viewed their roles in, quote unquote, saving Israel. So Trump, of course, said very famously, if we continue down our current path with the 4 more years of Kamala, Israel will be faced not just with an attack, but with total annihilation. And I hate to say it so much, it's total annihilation. That's what we're talking about. You don't have a protector. You have a big protector in me. So that's Trump. And Vice President Kamala Harris on October 7th at a memorial ceremony, she said, on this solemn day, I will restate my pledge to always ensure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself. So those are their basic views about their roles in protecting Israel. Now, Channel 12, our main television channel here in Israel, conducted a poll that was published on Monday this week, and it showed that Israelis massively favor Republican Donald Trump over Democrat Kamala Harris. So, Haviv, what did you see from this poll?
Right, it was 66 to 17, right?
That's right, and 17 others said they just don't know.
Right. Look, I would say this. The Joe Biden did a lot better with Israelis. And up to what was the poll we were looking at? Something like almost half and half, right? Or they were running dead even within single digits, or right?
Right. So in December 2023, obviously before Biden left the race, 40% of Jewish Israelis wanted Biden to be reelected compared to 26.2% who backed Trump. So that's 40 versus 26%, way out in front, huge.
Right. And that swing from support for Biden to lack of support for Kamala Harris, I think, is a function of a sense that Israelis have that Kamala Harris, her statement that she will protect Israel, back Israel in the great sort of regional contest that is now underway, which is very dangerous for Israel and very costly for Israel. By these horrific actors, by the Iranian regime, right? There's destroying nations in this war with Israel, in this war to destroy Israel. That's the lip service. And what she will actually do is connected more to the progressive camp that does not want to have America stand by Israel. And I don't, I don't want to weigh in on the election, but I can't help feeling that Kamala Harris earned that Israeli distrust with a lot of the sort of political footwork that has been going on with her attempt to both cater to that progressive wing. They got to pull everybody out. It's a very close election, and also hold on to as many Jews as they can hold on to in swing states. And so they're saying all the things all at once, the Democrats. And I don't know that I can parse a policy out of that, except to say that it's quite likely, it's extremely likely. I don't know anyone who argues otherwise, including among Kamala Harris supporters, that she will be Joe Biden minus when it comes to backing Israel in this existential long-running war with the Iranian regime on multiple fronts. And so, yeah, I think Israelis are responding to something real.
I think you're entirely right that Israelis have no idea how Kamala Harris will perform. And Israelis, for generations and generations look to the past in order to understand the present and the future. So let's look at what Trump has actually done for Israel in his one term that he had so far. He pushed a series of pro-Israel moves, including moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. That's huge. In 2017, there was a poll done by CNN, and it showed that most Americans did not want to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and yet Trump did it. And for Israelis, this is ginormous. Perhaps a symbolic move, but ginormous. Another thing Trump did while in office was, of course, recognizing the annexation of the Golan Heights. We're right now fighting for the Golan Heights during this war in a way. And of course, there's the Abraham Accords that brought together countries that we never thought we'd have relations with. So I think those are other factors, of course, in how Israelis see the two candidates. Wouldn't you agree?
I think so. I think Trump proved to be very much, to have Israel's, not all of Israel itself is a very diverse place politically, but to have the Israeli mainstream's sense of what was happening in the Middle East, that the fundamental aggressor and, bad actor is Iran, that America is strong and capable, that America could take out Qasem Soleimani and not pay a price. And that therefore an America that we've seen under the Democratic administration that's been afraid of its own shadow. You have Israelis are watching the American response, for example, to the Houthis. The Houthis have stopped most international shipping through the Suez Canal for a year. And the United States Navy is one of the most expensive things that American taxpayers pay for. And its fundamental purpose is to keep the world safe for commerce. This is a commercial people, and Americans believe for 200 years that commerce is the heart of the function of government, protecting commerce. And this Navy, this CENTCOM, this immense military with so much capabilities, can't take out the military capabilities of this desert tribe that can barely build roads, that does nothing, that has a collapsing currency, that is incapable of running the territory of the half of Yemen that it controls. And the Americans can't stop it. And then when the 121st Houthi attack on Israel actually punches through the missile defense system and kills an Israeli civilian, the Israelis in one fell swoop fly 2,000 kilometers and take out their central oil export depot and cost the Houthi government most of its foreign currency income. And CENTCOM people that you can talk to and are very frustrated at the sense that they are being held back from solving a major problem to international shipping by an administration that is addicted to the status quo, terrified of escalation at every turn, and broadcasts it to everyone around. And so there is a sense that Trump, because he was not afraid of escalation, actually faced fewer problems in the Middle East than a Democratic administration that is afraid of escalation. Now, that's not an argument to vote one way or the other. It's an argument that Democrats need to be capable of escalating if they want to avoid escalation. And so Israelis saw that daily. And Americans don't experience that. They're far away. And so there is a sense that Trump, I was deeply unimpressed by moving the embassy to Jerusalem. And I think that I was a little turned off it by the way that the Israeli government talked about it. Netanyahu's statement welcoming it said that Trump was the new Cyrus, who is the emperor who allowed, after the Babylonian captivity, the Jews to return. And that sense of that sort of kowtowing felt to me very, very wrong. Jerusalem is not less my capital or more my capital based on what a foreign government says it is. However, Trump didn't just do those symbolic things. He did really significant strategic things. And so Israelis do see that and sense that. Both parties have downsides for Israel, just purely at an Israeli strategic level. We don't actually entirely 100% know which Trump we're going to get, because in the Republican Party, in the coalition that's pushing Trump into the White House, are isolationists who would take away more from Israel than the Democratic Party, even if the progressives make major gains in the party, and would support Israel less and would engage the Middle East less and would face down Iran less. And, Tucker Carlson is everywhere, and he's on stage at the RNC with Trump. And he is absolutely opposed to aid. He's absolutely opposed to support. If America seriously faced down Iran, all over the Middle East, for America's many allies in the Middle East, and just to stabilize global oil markets and just to allow shipping through the Suez Canal again, it could take all the aid away from Israel, because that would be the great strategic thing we need the aid for. In other words, it's an America that knows its strength, not with boots on the ground, but just knows its strength. Just in the last 3 weeks, we've seen new sanctions imposed by the U.S. administration on Iranian oil smuggling to China. There are these tankers smuggling oil. They think they're being very clever. They think they're being secret. Tankers in mid-ocean switching the oil over to other tankers. And the American Treasury Department has come down and started to massively sanction that smuggling, and that raised insurance costs on the oil, and China is stopping to buy some of the oil it buys from Iran, and the Iranian economy is losing a tremendous source of income because of it. And America did that, this obvious step that it has refused to do for a long, long time. Something like a double-digit percentage of Iraqi oil exports are Iranian oil laundered through the Iraqi export system to avoid sanctions. And America knows it. And why did America suddenly impose these sanctions that actually cut massively Iranian oil sales to China, literally this month? Because they're trying to convince the Israelis not to bomb Iranian oil depots. So Israel suddenly being much more aggressive, being aware that it has escalation dominance and acting like it, has brought out from the American administration, has brought it out of its feebleness and its unwillingness to actually act. And if that's the question Israelis are asking, is which American administration knows the strength of America and is willing to act, that I think is a big part of the 66-17 favoring of Trump.
I just want to say that Israelis obviously do not predict the elections. And in fact, in 2020, the polling showed that 63% of Israelis favored Trump versus 17% who said they'd back Biden. And we all know in the end who was the president. Now, Haviv, let's talk a bit more about how Americans are viewing Israel vis-a-vis the war and how this goes down through party lines. And you and I have been looking at this poll that was done and published just today, actually, October 30th. We're recording on a Wednesday, from AP. And it talks about really a lot of different things. But one of the things that you just touched on, how Americans really do not want their soldiers, their sons, involved in this kind of regional war. And that was part of the polling that we saw, the intervention versus isolationism. So what are some of the things that jumped out to you from this poll?
Well, so the first thing is something that the world needs to know about America, and certainly I think American administrations are very well aware of. Americans do not want to fight more wars in the Middle East. They've had enough, and they were terrible ideas, and they were fought badly, and in most cases. And the Middle East never showed that it knew how to take advantage of the gift of that American sacrifice of money and blood. And that's true in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Middle East, sort of everything that's dysfunctional in the Middle East swings back in and ruins anything that America tries to do. And that, I think, is the general sense in America. So you see, for example, when this poll asked how many Republicans, Independents, and Democrats support deploying U.S. troops to help Israel's military. Among Republicans, it's 27% support, 51% oppose. And among Democrats, it's 21% support, 58% oppose. Those are almost identical.
Finally, something everyone agrees upon, right?
Everyone agrees on. Don't send boots on the ground in the Middle East. Exactly. And for Israel. And I think that, for Afghanistan, it's even lower. And then when you get to like places like economic sanctions on Iran, there's majority support in both parties. 66% of Republicans, 53% of Democrats. Majority support and opposition in both parties to economic sanctions on Iran is just 13%, both identical. So it's really interesting, I think, that that Americans don't want boots on the ground, but they're willing to engage in other ways. And then somewhere in between is enormous support for sanctions and zero, extremely low, so a quarter support for U.S. troops. Somewhere in between is providing weapons and aid and taxpayer aid money. Democrats are at 29% for aid. Republicans are at 46% for government funds to aid Israel's military. So Democrats, it's 47 to 29 against. Republicans, 46 to 36 for. Money is a little bit of a problem. Providing weapons, there's more support. But sanctions on Iran is the enormous thing. Now, I got to tell you, the American people are not stupid. The thing we need is America to bring Iran to heel. And Iran is an incredibly vulnerable country. And we have shown that over the last month. And what America could do just by properly sanctioning the place, just by fulfilling its own, alleged policies, would change the Middle East fundamentally for the better. And it would cost America nothing, and there'd be not a single soldier on the ground. And so there's a sense that I think the American public also senses that. And I have to tell you, when you actually look at this polling, you realize that the Israeli public isn't stupid when it favors Trump to Kamala 66 to 17, because the base is very different. Republicans are 51-29 for providing Israel weapons. Weapons is a different story from money. Asking Israel to pay for it is fine, but we actually don't produce enough missiles to conduct the wars with Iran's many proxies that Iran has launched against us. One of the great pivots of this moment in Middle Eastern history, and it kind of went unnoticed, when we killed Nasrallah, the bomb that killed Nasrallah was made on an Israeli production line that runs 24/7. And is a new production line, and those production lines are being expanded. Israel is becoming slowly, painfully, it's hard to build that out very quickly, missile supply independent, but it isn't yet. And so the huge gap, the mirror image between Republican willingness to provide Israel weapons and Democratic preference not to provide Israel weapons is an enormous difference for the future of Israel. And so there is a sense that even if Kamala Harris, the moments where she sounds like Joe Biden and says, I will support Israel's right to defend itself and we will stand by Israel, we're not going to let Israel's enemies destroy. But her party, her voter base thinks differently. And so how stable could what she's saying possibly be once she's not running in an election? So I think Israelis have a point, and it's in all the data. In other words, you can't escape it. It's in every poll.
The other point in this particular poll that really drew my attention and kind of speaks to the Israeli perspective on who would support them more is in the question of who do voters blame for the escalation of the war in the Middle East. And the parties were pretty parallel, Republican and Democrat, when it came to the Palestinian militant groups, the Iranian government, the Lebanese militias, the militant groups. And when it comes to the Israeli government, however, you can see that the Democratic voters blame the Israeli government for the escalation 57% versus the Republican voters, which blame the Israeli government by only 26%. And that really jumped out to me. Did you see anything else in this poll that spoke to you?
Right. The fundamental narrative is different on the two sides. I'll just say what Democrats do seem to believe is a pox on all their houses. 57% say the Israeli government has a lot of blame for the escalation of war in the Middle East. That was the question. So it's not just Gaza. It's Gaza, it's Lebanon, it's Iran, it's Syria, it's everything. 57% say the Israeli government has a lot of blame. 62% of Democrats say the Hamas, has a lot of blame. 52% say the Iranian government has a lot of blame, and 49% say Hezbollah has a lot of blame. they're all, and by the way, and the ones who say none at all is 10, 14, 12, and 13. In other words, the gap is, so there's a lot more. There's a quarter and more, who's a quarter to a third, who say they have some blame. So what Democrats appear to believe is that the Israelis, Iranians, Lebanese, Hamas, are all a bunch of crazies. And maybe that's why they also don't support too much American involvement in the region. When you go to the Republicans, there's a much, much clearer sense. 26% of Republicans say the Israeli government is to blame a lot. 72% say Hamas is to blame a lot. 66% say the Iranian regime is to blame a lot. 69% say Hezbollah is to blame a lot. So in the Republican voters, it's very, very stark and clear by a gap of 50 points that the Israelis are under attack and the Iranian empire, the Iranian proxy system, is the aggressor. And that's a huge difference. And that's a difference that we're talking, again, a poll of voters. We're talking bottom up. So how could the Republican administration, even if it's a little bit isolationist, not just respond to the fact that an overwhelming number of its voters think Iran is the aggressor? Neither you nor I want to tell people how to vote. You and I don't vote as a matter of principle. And there's a lot at stake in an American election, to take it from the sort of what is in American politics, the left. You and I both have universal health care, and Israelis have a life expectancy that's something like 4.5 years longer than Americans. And there's a lot at stake. There are many ways in Israeli politics in which Israelis are more lean Republican in a great many issues, social issues, economic issues, where Americans have so much at stake in an election that to ask them to vote on the question of Iran doesn't feel like a serious ask. But just narrowly to the simple point that emerges from the data on the question of who you blame for the wars, what you think is actually happening in the Middle East, and how you think America can be a useful a force for good and for stability and for ending all the wars everywhere where Iran builds a proxy. That place is destroyed. Just Google Yemen in the last 10 years. There's 250,000 dead of starvation. That has nothing to do with Israel. That's Iran. That's the Houthi Shia civil war that Iran is setting on fire everywhere it can. And if Democrats don't see that and don't get that and are politically invested in not seeing it, and the administration will ultimately have to answer to the voters, then that's a gap you can't hide, you can't pretend isn't there. And it's a huge gap. And so just that sense that a Republican administration will see an aggressor in Iran that isn't that it doesn't see in Israel. The Israeli voters aren't stupid. They sense that. So anyway, I don't want to tell you who to vote for, but on the question of Iran, the gap is really, really stark between Democrats and Republicans.
Right, Haviv. And, I grew up both in Canada and in the US, and then I moved here to Israel. And so I kind of could see the big differences between having universal health care and not having it, and then having it again. And of course, having 7 children with universal health care is not to be sneezed at.
Oh, you're the reason our taxes are so high.
It is me.
I'm starting to understand.
You have found me. It is my evil plot. In any case, we are not here to tell anyone how to vote in any kind of way, but we did want to bring to this podium just kind of the way how Israelis see this election, and to bring forward some of the different themes that we see as important. So Americans, go out and vote. That's the most important thing, not who you vote for. Just do it. Exercise your right if you can. And thank you, Haviv, once again for joining me from the U.S. this time.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. It's going to be an interesting election to watch. 51 million early voters, which is unprecedented. And this wonderful joke that came across Twitter about the sense of apocalyptic dread that grips Americans on both sides right now. As this guy writes, it's a shame that there's about to be concentration camps established in America for 1/2 of the population. And the worst part of it is I don't know which half yet. Look, America's strong. America's fundamentals are strong. There's no apocalypse coming. And there's so many different things to vote on. And you have such a weird and interesting voting system that it's really hard to predict and know where things are going to go. And everybody has to go vote. That's, I think, I agree with you, the fundamental.
Yalla. Thank you for listening to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now. Please join us next week for another installment. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until next week, shalom.